All right. This is Faith and Calm, class 177. I know it seems a little hard to do, but we're going to start with a joke or a story, a joke, to just because it's very much connected with the Parsha. So there was this guy many years ago in this little town, Shtetl, in, I don't know, Ukraine, wherever he was. And he was very rich, but also known as a tremendous miser, and nobody really liked him in the town. He was, and for good reasons. He was bad to his wife. He was bad to his neighbors. He was bad to his kids. Nobody. He had a good, and he lived a long time. Anyway, after a long life, he dies. And so the rabbi and they have to have a minyan. Go to the cemetery, and usually to say a eulogy, a hesped for the person. So the rabbi gets up and says, we have a custom in this town. We always have to say something good about the person who died. So does anybody here have anything good to say about this guy? Nobody volunteers. The rabbi says, we can't bury him until we hear something good. And 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by. Everybody is plotting, it's an hour already. There's nobody who has anything nice to say about this guy. Finally, after an hour, there's one old man in the back. And he says, I have something to say about him. The rabbi says, is it good? He says, yeah, it's good. So he says, okay, fine, you can say it. He says, well, I knew his brother, and his brother was actually worse. So that's the introduction to this week's the Parsha we read on Shabbos, which is very much connected with the times and what's going on. It starts out in Hebrew. It says, Eila toldos Noach. These are the generations of Noach. Noach, Ish, Tzadik Tamim Haisa Bedoroso. Noach was a perfect, complete tzaddik in his generation. At Chachalim Noach. Noach went with God. Okay. The rabbis, everybody's muted except for me.
Okay, good.
So the rabbis were sensitive to nuance. And they noticed there's an extra word, a word here that just doesn't seem to fit. You're trying to praise the guy, so say he was a complete tzaddik, period. End of sentence. What do you have to keep going and say, in his generation? Was he a tzaddik in somebody else's generation? I mean, where does he live other than in his generation? He doesn't live. He lives in his generation. If you're going to call him a tzaddik, you have to say he's in his generation. So what do you mean in his generation? So Rashi, coming from the Gemara, using two quotes from Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who were a famous pair together. One was the father-in-law, one was the son-in-law. And they used to get into all these really intense debates in the Gemara. Anyway, so they have this opinion, the two opinions. One of them says, and this is all coming to praise Noah. It's saying his generation. Take a look at his generation. His generation was a terrible generation. It was really full of Hamas, which is what the Torah says. It was a generation of violence. Hamas, literally, Hamas. The world was filled with Hamas. Hamas means violence. There were Hamas supporters everywhere. At Harvard, they were at Cornell. They're everywhere. They're in the Congress, and so forth. They say Hamas is doing a good thing. It's okay what they're doing, justified. Anyway, the generation was full of Hamas, and so God had to bring a flood. So the generation was really a difficult generation. So look at Noah. He stood up against that entire generation, all those people, and he was a tzaddik. So this is a praise of Noah. This is not the grace of Noah. To call him the tzaddik of his generation, who is that generation, to be a tzaddik, he's pretty good. The other rabbi, Rabbi Yochanan, says, no, that isn't what it means. It means that relative to his generation, he looked good. Like the joke I told at the beginning. But if he was in the generation of Abraham, he wouldn't be considered like anybody because Abraham was a real tzaddik. And this guy, he was sort of a, so-so kind of guy. The Rebbe at a Sikha analyzed this and said, Torah is usually extremely careful not to say anything negative about anybody. It certainly doesn't go out of the way to obliquely insult the person. So this doesn't sound right, you know. If it has to say something an animal is not kosher, it has to by halacha say that. But if it can say it in a nice way, it will say it in a nice way, as the old phrase goes, you know. If you don't have anything good to say about the person, just don't say anything. Why do you have to say go? You call him a tzaddik. You call him the tzaddik of the generation. Nobody else in Chumash gets this title, by the way. Nobody else is called a tzaddik in all of Chumash. Not Abraham, not Moses, not Yosef. Nobody's called a tzaddik in the Chumash. So if it calls him a tzaddik, and he is, by the way, all our grandfather for everybody here. If it wasn't for Noach, none of us would be here today. So he saved all of us. We're alive today because of Noach. And he's our grandfather. So why are we denigrating him and saying, relative to his generation? But if he would be a nobody, he would be a nobody if he was in Abraham's generation. Got the question? Okay. So here's the Rebbe's interesting answer. He says, no, it's all giving a praise. And it's a praise that's very relevant to now and today. So oftentimes, if you read a book, and a Torah book about a great, great rabbi, and you read this, and you read how he mastered everything when he was 4 years old, and he was a wonder child, and he was just amazing, and his kindness was amazing, and his knowledge was amazing, and his self-sacrifice, and the little sleep he did, and everything else. You go, you read it and say, that's interesting. What does it in the world have to do with me? I mean, my problems and my traumas, and everybody, I don't live like that. So it's not really relevant to me. And I really don't get inspired by it because it's just completely beyond who I am. Noach was literally the everyman. Because look at the end of the Parsha. What does it say about Noach? He was an Ish Adamah, a man of the earth, which figuratively means a farmer, but just basically means he was the average dirt kind of, guy. He planted some vineyards. He liked to drink. He got drunk. He covered himself in his tent. He got, he had a little too much schnapps at the Kiddush. He had, he wasn't such a. That's what we know about him. We know he built an ark, and we know that he was basically, a human being. And that's the amazing thing about it, because you see, he saved the whole world. He was just an average Joe. He was Joe the plumber. He was just an average Joe. And yet he saved the whole world. And he saved the whole world, showing that, what? If you're a tzaddik and you're holy, of course you could, you're an amazing person. But it's the average person who really shows how fantastic just a basic, simple human being is. What they can do, what they can accomplish, what they can, and when they're put in a situation, they can rise up above all the obstacles and everything else that's going on around them. And that is what the lesson of Noach is. It's the amazingness of the average person, the average us, who relates to us. When we have inside of ourselves, we don't feel it, we don't know it. We think it's only for special people that, you hear these special stories about it. But it's not. It's not. It really is the average person. To connect that with what's happening right now, there are so many stories coming out of Israel of just fantastic stories of everyday people and what the amazing things that they did. I'm going to tell you a couple of these stories. So, I mean, did you know the Hamas really they overwhelmed the first perimeter guards of Israel. And when they got through, there was really nobody between them and Jerusalem. And they had maps of everything. They knew where houses were. They knew where things were. They were headed to Jerusalem. They would have killed 60,000 people in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem if there hadn't been for certain unique, special individuals who just, with no army background or anything else, they just went and they started shooting and protecting the Jews and rescuing people from places. So here's a couple stories like that. The first story is just a story of a lady in Ofakim, which was overrun by the terrorists, and they came to her house. And 5 of them, and 5 terrorists, and they came in, and Rachel Edry was her name, and she knew that she didn't have any guns, And the thing she had to do was delay them as much as possible until finally the police and the army came. So what did she do? She says, "I'm a very good balabosta." This is relates to she takes care of people. So she says, "Hey, you must be hungry. I have great cookies." So she started giving these guys. They sat down at her kitchen table and they started, cookies. She spoke a perfect Arabic, so she was talking to them in Arabic and about the cookies. And Jay said, "Do you have any Coke?" And she says, "Yeah, I have Coca-Cola." She brought out the Coca-Cola. He said, "No, no, no, no. We want the classic Coca-Cola. We don't want that newfangled Coca-Cola." So she had to go and get the right. This conversation went on for like 4 or 5 hours and so forth. They're sitting there at her table. And then her sons, who happened to both be in the commando police, the Yassam, those black suited, policemen and so forth, they found out about this, and they overpowered them and killed every single one of them. But it was amazing. She was just like the presence of mind, and she was calm, and she knew what she was supposed to do. She did it. She survived. She survived, and it's just like it's a very special story.
How did she? You said she was waiting for people to come save her, but how did she even know anybody was coming that she was able to wait?
She knew her sons. She knew both her sons were in the police department, so she knew that they would be concerned about her and they would come, I suppose, But it's just one of the stories that was just I don't know. It doesn't say. All she says is that what in my house I know that hungry men are grumpy. So therefore,
right.
give them food. Maybe they'll be less grumpy.
It's very, very good. And then what you said about people that had no army experience shot people down. Really, they weren't army experienced.
No,
they must have had guns. So
some of them did. Some of them did. I'll tell you them. So like the Hezbollah, Eli Bear. So his wife, she got on a motorcycle, went down south and saved like 40 people while bullets were flying in Sderot.
You didn't mean Hezbollah.
No,
Hatzalah. God forbid.
Hatzalah.
I saw an interview with him.
Yeah, he was amazing. But here, let me tell you this story, because I think this story is going to tie up the idea very nicely. So Rabbi Wai told this story. He heard it. He was printed in Kikar Shabbat. There was this guy named Yair Unzbacher. Yair Unzbacher is from Jew. He lived, I guess, in Yerushalayim. He also happens to he had training in counterterrorism. So he was like one of those special commando squads. So it was Shabbos morning. It was Simchas Torah for them. And he had gone to the mikveh, and he was headed to the shul with his father, and the sirens went off. And anyway, so he, his father told him, I think his father-in-law told him, said, "I don't think that's just an air raid warning. That's something serious." So he went back and he found out, and he picked up his gun and he just got in his car and he headed down south. And there was nobody there, no police, no soldiers, no nothing. The whole road was wide open. And, whenever he saw them on the road, he would just, get rid of, exterminate them, because that was his training. Anyway, he gets to one of these kibbutzes, and the people there were no more terrorists in the kibbutz. And he goes to the bomb shelter and he sees that there's a whole bunch of people in the bomb shelter, and it had all been locked up. Some bomb shelters didn't have locks on the door, and that was a problem. They went in. But where they were able to seal it and lock it, the people were inside, but they were there for hours. So he starts yelling at them to come out because it's all clear. But they don't want to trust him because they're afraid that, who do they know? He could be impersonating an Israeli soldier. Some of them did that. They could know Hebrew. So he's trying to convince them. So what does he start doing? He starts telling them the laws of Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, and finally he convinces them, hey, they're not going to know this stuff. So they let him in, and he sees them. And of course, they're like, in shock, they've been there for several hours. They heard what was going on outside. And he said, my only reaction at that time, I saw them, I said, I had to go over to each one of them and kiss them. He went over to each one in the shelter, and he just said, I'm just kissing the Jewish body. I'm just kissing this person. I'm kissing that person. And he says, now that's the only thing he wants to do. Whenever he sees another Jew, he just wants to give them a big kiss, because he's just, it's the simple Jew he loves. Now Why is that? What is going on there? So let me tell you one other one other thing about that he tells about. He says that the day after this all happened, he got up for Shacharis. He was supposed to daven, and he said, he just couldn't pray to Hashem because the images of what he saw the 15 hours before, all day long, were just too overwhelming for him, and he was finding it impossible to pray. So he opened up a book, Igros Kodesh, the letters of the Lubavitcher Rebbe to different people, and he looked for inspiration. And when he opened it up, he came to a letter directly, and the letter was to a guy who was writing the Rebbe saying, "I'm having trouble praying." And the Rebbe's response to him was, "So if you are having trouble praying, it's because you're thinking about yourself. Why don't you try this?" The Rebbe says, "Think of yourself not as me praying to Hashem, but you are all the Jewish people collectively praying to Hashem. And you try that way, and you see how that prayer works." And Yair Unsbacher did that, and he said it was the most powerful prayer he ever did. It was just so moving because he really felt part of the Jewish people. This connects to a very much a question that we all have, and that is, why do the anti-Semites hate the Jews so much? And why do they just, they in such viciousness, in such hatred, in such all these stories and so forth? So the Rebbe in Asicha Parshas Bereshis, Nun Aleph, says, there's this phrase we're called the chosen people. What does it mean to be the chosen people? So some people say, we're the chosen because nobody would want to have such a history. Nobody wants to go through what the Jewish people have to do. But there's another thing to the chosen people. Meaning the chosen people means that when do you have a choice of something? When it is not, when it's identical. You can't say, I have equal desire for having a pizza or a steak, because they're different things. And it's the pizza or the steak that drives the decision. Either it appeals to you or it doesn't, but it's not about you. When two things are 100% equal, the same, then it's the person making the choice. The same for God. When he says we are the chosen people, it means he chose us not because of our soul, the Jewish soul, which is different than the non-Jewish soul, but rather because we have bodies. And not just that we have bodies, but just our plain physicality, not even the body it's a body that did mitzvahs, it's the body that lights candles, it's a body, although those are all good things to do. That's how the body gets refined. So Jews should light candles, they should put on tefillin, they should keep Shabbos, because that helps reveal who they essentially are. But the body itself, even before it has a bris, before it does anything, is special in God's eyes. Why? Because God chose. And he didn't chose. I'm no different than a non-Jew. Yeah, he chose. He wants us. And he chose us, and he gave us a land, and he wants us to have a land and to be able to bring holiness into a physical land. And some Jews have no problem with that, because they see that what a Jew is doing is bringing holiness, godliness into the world. He's both a combination of holiness, and he's a combination of earthiness. And and that's amazing. That's amazing that you can actually transform the physical world. But for certain ones, they look at it, they say, this is a threat, because they figure world is different than God, and they can't go together. And therefore, there's a God, he can control the world, but he's not the same thing as the world. And when a Jew comes along and says, no, we're going to take the physical world and we're going to turn it into something that's holy, something that's beyond just purely physical, a place where God himself feels comfortable down here, you're stealing our land. You're taking earthliness and you're making it into something that's not world anymore. So we can't be the big bosses here in the world. Our religion is not powerful over the world. They hate it. They hate the Jew, and they especially hate the Jewish body. And they attack the Jewish body, and they mutilate it, and they behead it, and they do all those other kinds of things. And this is what we are learning from this week's parsha is the unity of the Jewish people, not because they're kibbutzniks or they're religious or they're Haredi or they're Hasidic or they're religious. All Jews in Israel now, right? They just care about each other and they're smiling at each other and they're taking care of each other because they realize, you know what? Our enemies hate us at our core just because we have a physical Jewish body. And therefore we all are beloved in Hashem's eyes. We're all naturally beloved in Hashem's eyes, and we're all needed in Hashem's eyes. And we have to make every single Jew realize that how much he is part of the Jewish people, how much he is appreciated by Hashem, and how much and really what our mission is here in this world, which is to take a world which thinks it's something separate than God, and which thinks it's a creation of God, and to show it's not just the creation of God, it actually is revealed inside the creation itself that there's godliness here. And that's what Jews do in the land of Israel. That's what they do when they do a mitzvah. They reveal that really, Ein Od Milvado, there's nothing other than Hashem. And with that, I think I come to my end of my little Torah. I hope the stories were interesting. And I'm going to get, my wife says she has a bunch of good stories to tell too. A few.
Thank you. Yes, your co-op.
Okay.
Can I just tell you something? When I'm listening
Wait a
to the
second. I
class,
don't know that I was recording this thing.
You didn't record anything?
I don't see that I did.
I think you turned.
Oh, yeah, I
you
turned on
did. Don't worry
recording.
about
There
it.
I did.
It's
Okay, fine. Okay. Yeah,
Sorry,
go
What
ahead.
did you want to say?
Yes, sorry.
no, it's not a big question. I just wanted to tell you, I believe the next comes at 8 o'clock. So I don't want you to think I'm not listening. I am, but I'm running around because I have to finish all my things up and do everything because
Okay, don't worry.
the nurse is coming soon. So just so you don't
Don't worry.
feel insulted if I'm not like standing.
No, no.
Okay.
Fine. I'm fine. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. I have to call my family, so I'm just gonna log out for a minute. Okay. Okay, good. So I hope you'll stay on because I have some stories that I really, 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 really liked. And ooh, my wig's falling down. Okay, good. Now, why? This is such a weird angle. Everything's at such a weird angle today. Okay. Okay, good. So I want to start with thanking you all for coming, and I want to thank you for being part of our little group. That the purpose of our group, our little women's yeshiva here, is to strengthen each other. And in my lifetime, nothing like this ever happened, and nothing quite as dramatic as this. Nothing so viciously anti-Jewish has ever happened like this. And it shakes. I think it shakes all of us to our core. So I'm very grateful that it's so funny. I'm very grateful that everybody's here. And I'll start out with the four things that I usually do, which is that number one, we're in an extraordinary time. Quite obviously, we're in an extraordinary time. The Rebbe says this is the unfolding of the redemption. Now, how can something like this be the unfolding of the redemption? If you weren't on last week's class, I mentioned on last week's class that last week's session that Haskell Shim and I both fell down dramatically in the 11 hours right before the attack on Israel. I don't know if it had any connection, but we both fell down dramatically. He ended up breaking his ankle. And 11 hours later on Simchas Torah, a little kid came behind me in shul when I was dancing backwards. I didn't see her, and I flipped right over her, and I sprained my wrist. I thought it was broken. It was so bad. It was so painful. And anyway, so later on in the week, I was too worried about Israel to think about what had happened to us. But later on, I thought, I should open up Igros Kodesh to see, why would Haskell Shim and I both have calamities within 11 hours of each other, and what is this all about? So and we both fell. We both fell. That's exactly what we both did. And and so the Rebbe said, so I put it in, and I opened up to a letter about falling. And, and the Rebbe said that you have to know that every fall in Jewish history, every fall, no matter how dramatic it is, every big fall, every little fall that happens to a Jew is Litzorach Li'aliyah. It's called oh gosh, Yerida Tzariach Li'aliyah, a fall that is necessary for the subsequent ascent. So if it's true for me and Yehezkel Shimon on our tiny little scale, I mean, it was a very beautiful letter, frankly, and very reassuring. But it was even more reassuring to me about Israel, because that's what we want to know. We want to know that this is a fall that is necessary for the tremendous ascent that's going to follow afterwards. And so anyway, I'm going to go. I want to mention one thing that needs to be said. So many of us, we're just a very, very busy people, and we don't have a sense of history. And thank God, Yaskel Shimon has a big sense of history. I have a little sense of history, but he has a much bigger one, and he helped me with some of this, because I know that I know that the report, as a former newspaper reporter, I know that the reporting about Israel has been horrendous for decades and absolutely not true. And big name newspapers saying ridiculous things. I think I'll talk about that more another week, because I want to focus this week on beautiful stories. But people should know anyway. There's a mosquito right here. People should know that Jews feel such guilt over the Palestinians. You have to know that when in 1948, when Israel was divided and Israel got Israel and the Arabs were wherever, the Jews did not. First of all, you have to know that when that war happened, when that division happened, I heard equal numbers. Yehezkel Shimon heard greater numbers. There were okay, these Palestinians left Israel. The Jews did not throw them out. The Jews said, stay. We have our new state, stay. And the Arabs said, you guys come over here, and then we're going to attack all together, and we're going to get it back. And so the Palestinians left willingly. They left on the advice of their Arab brethren. And to the contrary, Jews were thrown out of one Arab country after another, and they were not thrown out nicely. They were not told to stay. They had to leave without any of their belongings, without any of their riches. My most frequent Shabbos guest, Claudine was she and her family were thrown out of Egypt. They had to leave their jewelry. They had to leave everything. They had to leave all, their businesses, everything behind. And that happened to Jews in all the Arab countries. But why is there no Jewish refugee problem? There's a Palestinian refugee problem, but there's no Jewish refugee problem. So few people know about it. Why? Anybody know? Why is there no Jewish refugee problem? Because Israel was thrilled to absorb them, because the Jewish people always absorb their people. They're happy to get their people back. And the Arabs would not, every single Arab country would not let the Palestinians assimilate into their country. They kept them in their camps, and they used them as a political ploy against Israel, as a PR thing to denigrate Israel. So history is so little known. And so even Jews, we think, oh, we must have thrown them out. We didn't throw them out. Anyway, so that's just that. I want to go straight into beautiful stories, because in the midst of all the horror, there's so many beautiful stories. And I'm going to start out with a good friend of mine went to Israel. She went to Israel on the intermediary days of Sukkot, which means she was there right in time for the war. She flew on the intermediary days. Her kids were both in the reserves. They had already two of her boys. They had already been through the army. They were in the reserves, and they all were together at a friend's house in Ma'ale Adumim, outside of Yerushalayim, for Simchas Torah, which fell on Shabbos. And she and her husband were in Shul. And one of their kids, the youngest kid, came running to Shul and said, Mommy, Tati, you have to come home. Gedaliah's been called up to war. And I think they already knew about the attack, but now they knew that their son, who had been in the special forces, was now going to be on the front lines. And so they ran back to say goodbye to their son. And soon they found out that their second son would also be going to war, Yehuda, and both Gedaliah and Yehuda Blank. And and uh, and and Mrs. Blank, Esther Blank, she told me all these beautiful stories about what was happening in Israel. There's such unity in Israel now, and we all know that inter the conflict between Jew and Jew was at its maximum, perhaps ever in the world, right before the war. There, for years, I remember I had a cousin in Israel, and he used to warn me there's going to be a civil war someday between the religious Jews and the secular Jews because we can't stand it anymore. And 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 it was coming to a huge peak right before this happened. And so once we were attacked, and the Jews realized, wait a minute, we are family. What are we doing here? So what happened? There's a before the war, there had been a Tel Aviv restaurant that was notorious for being non-kosher, treif. It was notorious. It liked it that way, and it was boldly treif. As soon as the war happened, overnight, they koshered the entire restaurant and started sending kosher food to the front. There was a in Yad Vashem, that's the memorial for the Holocaust victims. Well, there happened to be an employee there, a Jewish employee who was outspokenly pro-Palestinian for years and years and years. And after the attack, people went back to work, and they were having like some kind of meeting. And at the beginning of the meeting, he stood up and he said, "I want to tell you guys, I was wrong." And and so okay, good. So then I'm going to okay, good. I want to tell you another story. This is a story. This is a story from Mrs. from okay. This is a story from a famous rabbi, Rabbi Zaid. Rabbi Zaid. My husband heard about him. He's from Kiryat Sefer, and there was a Sheva Brachas, a celebration after when a couple gets married, they're feasted for 7 nights. And at one of these feasts, Rabbi Zaid got up and told his story, and he said that in town there was a seminary called Or Chachaim. That means a seminary is a place where like high school, 18-year-old Jewish girls go to continue their Jewish learning, and post high school. And one of these young women came up to Rabbi Zaid, and she said, "Rabbi Zaid, I've been saving my money." Right after the war broke out, she came to him and she said, "I've been saving my money, and I now have 6,000 shekels. You can correct me, but I think 6,000 shekels is about $1,500, something like that, and could be more or less." And she said, "I saved. This is all the money I have, and I want you. I don't know how to do it. I want you to buy tzitzis for as many soldiers as you can with my money." And he said, "You don't have to use all your savings to help people. There's a certain limit that, you don't have to do this." She said, "I'm doing it." And she argued and argued. She wouldn't listen. "Forget it. I'm doing it. This is what I'm doing." So he said, "Okay, I'll." And she said, "I want you to do it for me because I don't know what to do." So he found somebody, and he bought $6,000 worth of 6,000 shekels worth of tzitzis for her, because everybody knows. I'm not going to tell that story. The famous story that a guy's life was saved. A Jewish guy's life was saved. He was dressed in plain clothes, and he was laying down with the other terrorists. He was wounded, and they were going to leave him there wounded or even finish him off. And then somebody said, "Yeah, he's got tzitzis. He's Jewish." So it's a big thing that the soldiers all want tzitzis. So anyway, that's the background. So Rabbi Zaid got the tzitzis. He got the 6,000 shekels worth of tzitzis, and he went to her and he said, "I got your tzitzis." And she said, "Great. Now I want you to take the tzitzis with my brother, and I want you to drive down to the south of Israel and give them out to the soldiers." And he said, "You've got to be kidding. no, I helped you until this far. You have to get somebody else to do that. I'm not doing that. And she said, you have to do that. She's like a kid arguing with a rabbi. And she said, you have to do that. You're the one to do it. You have protexia. You have to do this. And he said, no, I'm not. Anyway, she argued with him. She prevailed again. And he said, okay, I'll try and figure out some way. So he called somebody in I don't know what this office is, Hidabrut, I don't know what it is. And they arranged for an army officer to go down with him and probably the brother and to go down south. And they were going fine they took them in an army vehicle down south. But then they got as far as Kvish, the 262, which means Route 262, and they were stopped by an army blockade. They couldn't get through. And the army blockade said, no citizens pass this point. That's it, no citizens. And they talked and talked and talked. No, we have to go. We're on a mission. We have to go. And finally, they told them there were 3 terrorists that infiltrated this area, and we caught 2 of them, and 1 of them got away. And so we are not letting any civilians pass this point. And Rabbi Zaid tried everything in his ability to talk these guys into letting him through. And finally, somebody called somebody else, and they said, "We're going to let you through. We're going to bring a we're going to make a convoy of army cars around your car, and that's how we're going to bring you in." And a very high-ranking army officer went in his car. And so they're going down, and the high-ranking army officer says to Rabbi Zaid, when all this is said and done, there's going to be a lot of questions asked. There's going to be a lot of investigation into what happened on that morning. What were our oversights? How could this possibly have happened? And the high-ranking army officer said, and I know what the conclusion is going to be. The conclusion is going to be, Ve'ez Hashem hayasasos. This was from Hashem. This whole thing, this whole Simchas Torah attack was from Hashem. It's something that Hashem meant to happen. It was the hand of Hashem. Anyway, they finally get to the base, and They get out of the car. Rabbi Zaid starts giving tzitzis to this guy, and he sees a guy in the distance, and he starts walking to him to give him tzitzis too. And the guy in the distance goes like this, like, don't come. He motioned to him, don't come. And Rabbi Zaid didn't know why. And he took the tzitzis off. He took the tzitzis off of him, and he wadded them up in a ball, and he threw them to the guy. It was a little bit of a windy day, and the wind carried it a little bit away from the guy towards a bush. And the thing lands on the bush, and an Arab terrorist pops out from behind the bush. That's where he was hiding. But the tzitzis startled him so much that he didn't know what was going on, and he popped up, and they shot him, and he went to heaven wrapped in tzitzis. So those tzitzis saved who knows how many lives. Okay. Okay, good. There's a wife of a guy named.
Did he just throw one?
He threw one. He threw one tzitzis, and the terrorist was hot, and the wind carried the tzitzis a little, not towards that guy, but towards a bush that was right near there, and that's exactly where the terrorist was hiding, and he was so shocked he jumped up, and they got him. So anyway, her tzitzis saved who knows how many lives. So anyway, good. So the next thing I want to say, there was this is very brief. I'm not going to give it in detail. There was a wife, a very holy rabbi. I think he's a Sephardi rabbi, Reb David Batsari. His wife was extremely sick, and his wife was extremely sick, and she could barely sleep. She was very, very, very uncomfortable. One day, when she's very, very, very sick, all of a sudden she's out for 4 hours. She's sleeping for 4 hours. And she woke up afterwards, and she said, I was in heaven. And in heaven, there's an argument between the righteous Jews who have already passed away and the angels. And the righteous Jews say that Hashem must redeem the Jewish people now. and the angels are disagreeing. And she didn't mention why the angels were disagreeing. Sometimes the angels don't think we're worthy of something. So, and she said, they allowed me, probably was her time to pass away. They allowed her to come back to earth to tell people that the answer to this war is unity and love and warmth for all Jews, from one Jew to the next, unity, love, and warmth. And she told her story, and the next day she passed away. So now I'm going to conclude with one more story and about Jewish unity. That, Jewish unity is the answer. It is the answer to this whole thing, and it's happening, and it has to happen more and more and more. So, so this story I know from a very, very one of my best friends in the whole world lives in Baltimore. And her husband heard this story from a man named a member of his shul, one of his fellow shulmates. His name is Chaim Gottesman, and he was there firsthand. So Chaim Gottesman was in Israel in the war. He was, just in Israel, and he heard. And I'll tell you the whole story. He heard the story here. I'll tell you where he heard it afterwards. But there was a right away in the beginning of the war, there's something called lone soldiers. What is a lone soldier? A lone soldier is a soldier who has volunteered to be in he's in the Israeli army, but he has no immediate family in Israel. And there are organizations to help them, because it's hard to be a soldier. You need a little bit of support. So there's different organizations. A very good one is Chayil El Chayil. It's run by a friend of, somebody I've known since he was like 11. It's a great organization. And anyway, so this lone soldier, unfortunately, was almost immediately killed, first days of the war. And his father was in America, and his father flew to Israel for the funeral. And this father, the father, was a Chabadnik. He was a Lubavitcher, like me and Yaskel Shimon. He was a Lubavitcher. And but there's Lubavitchers and there's Lubavitchers. There's Lubavitchers who are just brave as anything, and they're constantly asking people, do you want to put on tefillin? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And then there are some that are more shy. He was one of the more shy types. And as he was flying to Israel for his son's funeral, he felt that he wanted to do something. He wanted to do a mitzvah, an extra mitzvah for his son. So he had tefillin with him, and he asked the guy sitting next to him on the plane, I have tefillin. Would you like to put on tefillin? And the guy said, no, thanks. If a person doesn't usually do it, they're not interested. And then he looked at the guy on the other side of him and he said, I have some tefillin. Would you like to put on tefillin today? Did you put on tefillin? And the other guy said, no, thanks. And the two of them got together and they finally turned to him and they said, why did you ask us to put on tefillin? And he said, my son was in the Israeli army and he was killed right away in the beginning of this disaster, in the beginning of this disastrous attack. And I wanted to do something in his honor, something extra before his levaya. And they what are they going to say? They immediately turned to him and they said, we changed our minds. We're going to do it. We changed our minds. And so they put on the tefillin, and then word got around, and soon there was a huge line of people waiting, a huge line of men waiting to put on tefillin, one after another. They all wanted to honor this fallen soldier, and then they heard over the airplane PA system, this is the pilot. This is pilot blah blah blah. I'm temporarily turning over control of the plane to my co-pilot because I'm going to come where you are and I'm going to put on tefillin. So anyway, it's just like it's a beautiful time of unity, love, and warmth. And what we have to do is make sure that this becomes the norm and not the exception to the rule. So we each have to think in our own lives, what is it that we can do to enhance everything, and then go do it. So I'm going to turn off the recording, and then I'm going to ask if there's any questions. Okay, good. Where is the, oh, here it is. It's up here. There we go.